Franklin County, Ohio, now open pursuant to adjournment. All parties having business in this court, draw near, give attention, and you shall be heard.
By the way, the microphones are on. Mics are on.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. Court is in session. At this time, the court will conduct proceedings in the case of the State of Ohio versus Terry Bale. I am Justice Terrence O'Donnell from the Ohio Supreme Court, and I have the privilege of presiding over this proceeding. And I'm going to ask counsel starting on or my fellow judges starting on my far right to introduce themselves to you so you have some idea who they are and the capacity in which they're here.
My name is Jane Taylor. I'm president of the Ohio State Bar Association.
My name is Alexandra Schimmer, and I'm an attorney and chair of the Mock Trial Case Committee.
Go ahead, Mike.
My name is Mike Fain. I'm co-chair of the Competition Committee, and my day job is I'm a judge of the Ohio 2nd District Court of Appeals.
My name is Mike Honahan. I'm a practicing attorney, and I'm the representative of the ACLU here today.
My name is Jerry McBride. I'm a judge of the Claremont County Court of Common Pleas, and I'm also a member of the Competition Committee.
Thank you very much. And now the court is prepared to proceed. Are there any preliminary matters on behalf of the state at this time? All right, thank you. We appreciate you being here. How about on behalf of the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right, and could I have the bailiff administer the oath of office to the witnesses who are to be called in the case?
All witnesses and parties who are to give testimony in these proceedings, please step in front. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and that your testimony will comply with the rules of the Ohio Mock Trial Commission? Right.
Okay, I want to let all parties know that the court has taken time to get itself acquainted with the facts of the case. We will conduct this as a regular proceeding, but as an aside, we have all observed the demeanor and the manner in which you've conducted yourselves. We are proud of you, and aside from that comment, we will conduct this in a extremely professional manner. At this time, then, we'll proceed with the prosecution. Counsel, you may call your first witness. Did you want to make an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, before I begin, I would like to introduce my team.
Thank you.
My name is Forrest Prakash, and this is my co-counsel, Mr. Kevin Harrison.
Good afternoon, Your Honors.
And today we will be representing the state and the prosecution. I'd also like to present the state's two witnesses. Mr. John Raptis will be playing Detective Lynn Crest.
Good afternoon, Your Honors.
And Mr. Brent Fernand will be playing Dr. Saraj Pat.
Good afternoon, Your Honors.
May it please the court. On the 29th of July of 2005, the defendant attacked and killed Mickey Jones. In the trial which followed, the defendant was charged and convicted of the crime of murder. Your Honor, we are here today because the defendant claims that he and the entire population of paranoid schizophrenics should be exempt from the death penalty because they have paranoid schizophrenia. Your Honor, there are three issues in this case today. 1, is there a national consensus on paranoid schizophrenia? 2, does the death penalty serve as a form of retribution and deterrence against paranoid schizophrenics? And 3, is there validation for the use of a blanket exemption which would exempt the entire population of paranoid schizophrenics from the death penalty. Your Honor, the state of Ohio will prove today that there is no national consensus on paranoid schizophrenia, that the death penalty does serve as a form of retribution and deterrence against paranoid schizophrenics, and that there is no validation for the use of a blanket exemption which would exclude.
Very hard to hear in here. Go ahead.
That there is no validation for the use of a blanket exemption which would exclude the entire population of paranoid schizophrenics from the death penalty. Your Honor, the state of Ohio will present two witnesses. The first will be Detective Lynn Press. Detective Press is a 34-year veteran of the Rockwell City Police Force. And today, Your Honor, the detective will testify how he was a detective who arrested, interviewed, and obtained the confession from the defendant on the day of the crime, 29th of July of 2005. Detective Press will also go on to describe the various behaviors and actions exhibited by the defendant during the crime and during the course of the interview and the obtainment of the confession. Your Honors, you will also hear from the state's second witness, Dr. Saraj Pat. Dr. Saraj Pat is a Harvard graduate psychiatrist who, with his 2 decades plus of experience in the field of psychiatry, will testify today that the defendant, before and during the crime, went through a logical reasoning process. The doctor will also go on to testify how the very nature of paranoid schizophrenia means that it affects individuals on a case-by-case basis, meaning that not all paranoid schizophrenics share similar symptoms and have similar effects from paranoid schizophrenia. Dr. Saraj Pat will also testify to the fact that there is no bright line in paranoid schizophrenia, that in many cases other illnesses share the same symptoms as paranoid schizophrenia, and so there is no bright line. Your Honors, you will hear today how in the days leading up to the 29th of July, the day of which Mickey Jones was murdered, the defendant was leading a miserable life. He was frustrated, and he was in a desperate need of money. Your Honors will then hear how the defendant woke up on the morning of the 29th of July at 4 a.m. and took his daily dose of paranoid schizophrenic medication, which would mitigate the effects of paranoid schizophrenia. And then, Your Honor, 10.5 hours later, the defendant walked into CompuGames and Stuff, and after a few moments, stabbed Mickey Jones through the heart with a screwdriver and then stole the money out of the cash register. Your Honors, the defendant took the time to think about and to commit the crime. He took the medication to mitigate the effects of paranoid schizophrenia, and the defendant took the money after he took Mickey Jones's life. Your Honors, the state of Ohio respectfully asks that today you deny defense's motion, and you do not allow a blanket exemption to be put into effect which would exclude all paranoid schizophrenics from the death penalty. And so respectfully, Your Honors, the state of Ohio requests a rule in favor of the prosecution.
Thank you very much, Counselor. Does the defense wish to make an opening statement in this case?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to introduce my team. First, my co-counsel, Megan Del Santo. Along with her, I, Andrew Bluebond, will be representing Terry Bale in this case. I would also like to introduce our witnesses. First, Elise Balaj, who will be playing the part of Professor Elizabeth Albert. Also, our second witness, Emily Bazzelli, who will be playing the part of Dr. Barbara Goodwell. Thank you, Your Honors. May it please the Court. Before the Supreme Court's decision in the case of Roper v. Simmons in 2005, the United States was among just 4 nations that still put juvenile offenders to death. The other 3 nations were known human rights violators: Iran, Nigeria, and Saudi Arabia. When Simmons' case was heard before the Supreme Court, it was clear that the United States had fallen behind in this area of human rights. It is for this reason that we ask you today to put an end to the death penalty for the schizophrenic, an action that is in itself a violation of human rights. Like the mentally retarded, the schizophrenic are not given the choice to have this disability. As their symptoms progress, the ability to make other choices is taken away from them. The ability to choose to reason, to choose to control their own actions, and to choose to live a normal life are all stripped from the schizophrenic. Today you'll hear the case of Terry Bale, a schizophrenic who has had these choices, as well as others, taken away from him by a devastating disease for which there is no cure. We, the defense, ask that you grant the defendant's motion to remove the death penalty as a sentencing option for Terry Bale and for all other schizophrenics for 3 major reasons. First, the diagnosed suffer from debilitating, intractable traits that give them similar culpability to children and the mentally retarded, who have already been given relief from the death penalty. Second, that all schizophrenic offenders must be treated alike due to their drastically reduced culpability. And finally, 3, the absence of statutory death exclusions is simply not good enough for the prevention of Eighth Amendment relief for the schizophrenic. In order to prove these 3 points, the defense will call 2 witnesses. The first witness is Professor Elizabeth Albert, who will testify to her personal experience with Terry and to the rapid decline in his grades and effort in the classroom. Her testimony will help us to gain a better understanding of the real-life effects of schizophrenia. We will also call our second witness, Dr. Goodwell, an expert in schizophrenia who treated Terry Bale as well as many other schizophrenics. She has written in depth on the subject of schizophrenia and will give testimony regarding the effects of the disorder on the afflicted. She will also explain to her personal treatment of Terry Bale and the specific circumstances of his case. She will also explain Terry's interaction with Beastie and the good and bad voices he heard in his head at the time leading up to the crime. Through the testimony of our 2 witnesses, this court will gain a better understanding of schizophrenia, and today, that is what we ultimately hope to accomplish. In order for this court to make an informed ruling on the subject of schizophrenia, we need only listen to the testimony of the witnesses today. We ask you to consider the Supreme Court cases in which the United States barred the execution of juveniles and the mentally retarded and under the Eighth Amendment. We will compare the schizophrenic to these 2 groups because those are the standards that have been set. And using those standards, this court has the opportunity to grant relief to the schizophrenic, namely Terry Bale. This court has the opportunity to set a precedent of a highly evolved nation. Finding for the defense will set a precedent that nations around the world could only hope to uphold. For all of these reasons, we respectfully request that you find in favor of the defense and grant Terry Bale's motion to remove the death penalty as a sentencing option for him and for all other schizophrenics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is the state now prepared to call its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You didn't want to skip opening arguments, right? No. Okay, I was kidding. All right, you may call your first witness.
The prosecution would like to call Detective Lynn Press to the stand.
Will you step forward, please, sir? You've already been sworn. You may take a seat. Counsel, you may inquire.
Thank you. Could you please state your name and occupation for the court records?
My name is Lynn Press, and I'm a detective with the Rockwell Police Force.
And Detective, how long have you served in the police force?
Well, I've been walking the beat in Rockwell for about 34 years now.
And as a detective, what type of training do you undergo?
I graduated from the Rockwell Police Academy in 1972 with flying colors. I was put out on the streets as a detective shortly after that. And in the year 2000, I attended a law enforcement expo where I familiarized myself with some of the newest techniques and technology in use by the force today.
And Detective Press, are you familiar with the defendant?
Yes, sir. I'm actually the one who arrested, interviewed, and transcribed Bale's confession.
And could you describe to the court how you first encountered the defendant?
It was 29 July 2005, approximately 2:35 p.m. I was doing my routine patrol in downtown Rockwell when I noticed Bale walking down the street from the direction of the CompuGame and Stuff store. His shirt was stained with blood, and he was clutching a video game.
And Detective Press, when you saw the defendant, what did you proceed to do?
I took him back into the CompuGame and Stuff store so I could see what had been going on.
And when you took the defendant back into CompuGames and Stuff, what did you see, Detective?
I saw a man sprawled out. He looked to be the store clerk. There was a screwdriver protruding from his chest, and blood was emanating from this wound. He was screaming, and one of the things he screamed was, "How could you do this to me, Terry?"
Now, Detective Press, What did you proceed to do after you viewed this scene?
I arrested Bale and took him back to the police station, where I read him his Miranda rights so I could conduct a proper interview.
Detective, could you describe for the court the nature of the defendant's behavior as you were reading him his Miranda rights?
Bale seemed nervous at this time, a little bit off.
Objection, Your Honor. This witness is giving testimony as to the unqualified opinion testimony as...
Rephrase your question, Counselor.
Detective Press, could you relay to the court your observations of the behaviors of the defendant as you're reading his Miranda rights?
Yes, sir. Bale seemed like he wasn't making eye contact very well. It seemed to me, from my own observation, that he may have been a little bit nervous. But this is normal for many criminals who are just arrested.
And Detective, you said you conducted the interview following after you read his Miranda rights. Could you describe for the court what behaviors you observed of the defendant as you conducted his interview?
Yes, sir. At the beginning of the interview, I still couldn't get a pound of air out of Bale. He still seemed to me to be a little bit of nervous, but like I said, this is normal for many just arrested criminals after they are caught red-handed. Later on, though, after I mentioned death row as a punishment to Bale, possible punishment for Bale, he immediately perked up and answered all of my questions in a yes or no fashion.
And Detective, in the course of the interview, did you learn any more information about the defendant's life?
Yes, sir, I did.
And could you describe to the court what information you learned?
I learned from Bale that up to that point in his life, when he committed the crime, his life was becoming miserable. He was working reduced hours at his job, and consequently, he didn't have the money he wanted, which was necessary to buy the computer games which he enjoyed to play.
And Detective, did you learn any more information about the clerk who was killed, Mickey Jones?
Yes, I learned that in high school, Mr. Jones had been known to be a childhood bully, and he especially liked to torment Bale.
And Detective, did you learn of the exact sequence of events of the crime itself?
Yes, sir, I did.
And how exactly did you learn this information, Detective?
I viewed the store surveillance tape after the incident.
And could you describe for the court today what exactly you saw in this surveillance tape?
Objection, Your Honor. The contents of that videotape have not been entered into evidence today, and any testimony you would give regarding the contents is not verifiable in this courtroom.
Did you care to respond, Counselor?
Your Honor, if I may respond, I believe that the videotape evidence is admissible as it has been previously admitted in the prior trial, Your Honor. And also, the detective is just relaying his observations of what he saw of this recorded evidence, which is indisputable, as it was directly recording the events that transpired during the crime itself, Your Honor.
Mr. Bluebond, is it in evidence or not?
It has not been entered into evidence in this courtroom. It is not one of the exhibits entered into the mock trial rules.
All right, the objection will be sustained. We'll move on. Put another question to the witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Detective, could you describe what transpired during the crime itself?
Mr. Bale walked into the CompuGame and Stuff store with the intent of purchasing a video game.
Objection, Your Honor. This witness is not qualified to testify to the intent of Terry Bale.
That'll be overruled.
Thank you.
You don't need to thank us for rulings on objections. Just ask the questions.
Detective, would you like me to re-ask the question? Or
No, I'll just continue.
Okay.
As I said, Bale walked into the store intending to buy a video game. The video game was priced at $90, and he only had $20. And when he approached the counter, the clerk, Mickey Jones, made an antagonizing remark to Bale. This remark was, "How could you do this to
Objection,
me?"
Your Honor. This is contained within the videotape that has not been accepted into evidence.
Mr. Procase.
Your Honor, I believe the detective is just relaying the information he learned from the defendant and the information he learned about the crime sequence of itself in his interview of the defendant. And the detective is just relaying this information to this court to describe the crime, which is and which is very relevant to the proceedings today.
In response to the question, then, Detective, you may indicate what it is you learned from the defendant, but you may not learn what others said to him.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may continue.
After this, I learned that Mr. Bale grabbed a screwdriver from the desk. He proceeded to thrust this screwdriver into Mr. Jones's chest. After that, he grabbed the video game off the shelf, took all the money out of the cash register in the store, and bolted out the door.
And Detective, what did you do after you concluded the interview with the defendant?
After this, I transcribed the confession he had just given me.
And Detective, could you describe for the court the exact nature of this confession which you obtained?
Bale admitted to killing Mickey Jones, and he admitted that his actions were wrong.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Is there cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Detective, you said that Terry Bale was dressed like a punk, didn't you?
I did make that remark, but many people dress like that nowadays.
You said that you slapped the cuffs on him when you arrested him, didn't you?
Yes, sir, I did. This was to protect his own as well as my safety at that time.
And you also said that Terry was frustrated with his miserable life, didn't you?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And when you were trying to sort out what happened at the scene, all Terry told you was, I need to find him. I need to fight Beastie. I need to get to a computer. Is that correct?
Yes, I do believe that Bale was eager to play the video game he had just stolen.
Now, Detective, when you were arresting Terry, you said criminals always say things like that when they are getting caught, didn't you?
Yes, I did. This is very common for criminals to say things like this.
Detective Press, when you were arresting Terry, you had already made up your mind about him and what had happened at the crime, hadn't you?
Well, I believe that Mr. Bale did, in fact, kill Mickey Jones, and I verified that information after my interview with him.
So your testimony is that you had already decided what had happened, despite that no court had made a ruling or had made a decision of guilt or innocence on Terry's part at the scene.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
The relevance of this testimony is very relevant. As detective, the treatment of the detective towards Terry Bale is very important to this case, as we have to determine the mind state that Terry Bale may have been in at the crime, and how the detective treated him is very relevant.
All right, we'll overrule the objection, let him answer the question.
Would you like me to re-ask the question?
Yes, sir, if you could.
So, despite the fact that there was no court ruling on what had happened, you had already made up your mind about what had gone on at the scene, hadn't you?
I was the one who interviewed Mr. Bale, and it was me that he told that he had committed the crime.
Now, you said that you read him his Miranda rights very carefully, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Can you say for sure if Mr. Bale understood his Miranda rights?
In any scenario, it is my job to make sure that everyone knows their Miranda rights after I have read them to them. So based on my observations of other criminals and Mr. Bale, I do believe he understood his rights.
Your Honor, I ask that testimony be stricken from the record as unqualified opinion testimony as to the understanding of Terry Bale.
Your Honor, if I may respond, I believe that the question was, Detective, are you sure that the defendant understood his Miranda rights? And the detective merely responded by saying that I try in every circumstance to make sure that those who I arrest after they have committed a crime, that they understand the rights I have just read them. So, Your Honor, I believe that this was a correct response to the answer to the question which was asked, Your Honor.
All right, the motion to strike will be denied. The answer will
Yes,
stand.
When you were interrogating Terry, he responded by saying he was eager to play his new game, didn't he?
Yes, sir, that is correct. He was eager to play the game he had just stolen.
Is it true that Terry also told you that the victim was interfering with what he needed to do?
Yes, he did make that remark.
Is it true that you said Terry seemed distant during the interrogation?
Yes, at the beginning of the questioning, Mr. Bale did seem to be distant, but as I said on direct, this is normal for many criminals who are just caught red-handed.
Terry was in fact so distant that you had to rely on the store's surveillance system to find out what had happened at the scene, didn't you?
I do recall making that remark, but I would use the store surveillance tape in any other scenario where it was available as well.
But maybe you misunderstood my question. He was so distant that you had to rely on this because you couldn't get enough information from Terry himself.
He did seem to be distant to me, and that's part of the reason why I used the tape. But as I said before, I would do this in any other scenario as well.
So this is the same tape that wasn't admitted into evidence today, correct?
Yes, sir, I believe that's the same tape.
So you did not personally witness the murder, did you?
No, but Mr. Bale admitted to me that he committed the murder.
While you were interrogating Terry, he told you that he had to do what he had to do, didn't he?
He did make that remark, yes.
And despite the fact that Terry seemed distant during his interrogation, you continued to interrogate him for a full 70 minutes, didn't you?
Yes, this is a normal questioning session.
And then, isn't it true that after over an hour of interrogation, you asked Terry, a diagnosed schizophrenic, to sign a full confession?
Yes, sir.
This confession was only a string of yes or no answers, wasn't it?
It was a string of yes or no answers about the questions I had asked him about the events of that day, and it was a full confession.
But the confession itself was only a string of yes or no answers, wasn't it?
It was a full confession based on yes or no answers.
Now, Terry signed this confession with what appeared to be a recreation of Munch's The Scream, didn't he?
Terry signed the confession.
But maybe you misunderstood the question. Did he or did he not sign this confession with what appeared to be a recreation of Munch's The Scream?
Yes, this is just what it appeared to me at that time. It was, in fact, his confession.
Now, Detective, on direct, you testified that the defendant told you that he knew the crime was wrong. Now, you forgot to mention that this admission came only after you interrogated him for over an hour, didn't you?
Yes, sir, that's correct. This is a normal questioning session. I haven't had any problems in the past with this length of questioning, and Terry gave me that confession after that normal length of time.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honors. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you very much.
Redirect.
Will there be redirect then, Mr. Brokash?
Now, Detective, opposing counsel in their cross-examination concentrated on your methods of interrogation and the type of questions you asked. So could you describe to the court the exact lines of questions you used to interview the defendant?
Yes, sir. At the beginning, I started out with a series of open-ended questions just to open Terry up a little bit, to make him feel a little bit more comfortable. Later on, I asked questions that were more to the point. They were more closed-ended questions so that I could obtain the full confession out of these questions.
And Detective, how exactly and when exactly did you change your style of questioning in the interview?
I changed my form of questioning after I mentioned death row as a possible punishment for Mr. Bale.
And how did the defendant respond in his answers after you made the death row statement, Detective?
He answered with a string of yes or no answers, and these answers equaled a full confession to the murder of Mickey Jones.
And Detective, the opposing counsel in their cross-examination also concentrated on the defendant's signature on the confession statement. Could you describe the defendant's signature on the confession?
It was his signature. It merely just looked like a picture to me.
And Detective, what was the exact context or the content of the admission, of the admission statement or the confession statement, Detective?
Mr. Bale admitted to killing Mickey Jones, and he admitted that this action was wrong.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Is there recross examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Just to clarify for the court, the admission that Terry Bale gave you came only after you interrogated Terry Bale, a diagnosed schizophrenic, for over an hour.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
May I respond, Your Honor? While neither side challenges the validity of Terry's confession, this case serves as a model, as we hope to set a precedent so that all schizophrenics may not receive the death penalty. So we use Terry's case as a model and compare to other cases and see how his confession may compare to other schizophrenics.
If I may respond, Your Honor, I believe that the main topic of this trial today is the crime itself and the actions and the behaviors of the defendant during the actual actions of the crime on the 29th of July. What the actions and behaviors of the defendant were in the latter period during the context or during the time of the interview is not relevant, Your Honor, because the goals of this trial today is to determine the moral culpability at the time of while the defendant was committing the crime, his rational reasoning process while he was committing the crime, and also, Your Honor, determine whether or not the death penalty does act as a form of retribution and deterrence against paranoid schizophrenics. So, Your Honor, I don't see any relevance in questioning the detective about how the defendant was acting or how the defendant was behaving at the time of the interview, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. The objection will be sustained. Its testimony has already been gone into on direct, and it's not within the scope of this recross examination. Put another question to the witness, please.
Now, Terry Bale, when you were speaking to him, you said he seemed distant, right?
Yes, at the beginning he did seem distant.
And he continued to seem distant during the interrogation, is that correct?
He did continue to seem distant.
Objection, Your Honor, outside the scope.
Overruled.
Would you like me to re-ask the question?
I'll just continue.
Okay.
He did seem to be distant, but he did give me a string of yes or no answers that equaled his full confession.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honors. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. You're excused. You may step down.
Thank you, Your
Sir.
Honor.
Thank you. Will you call your next witness, please?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the state would like to call Dr. Saraj Pat to the stand.
Thank you. Doctor, you're already under oath. You may have a seat on the witness chair, if you will, please. Thank you. Counsel, you may inquire.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and occupation for the record?
My name is Dr. Saraj Pat, and I am a practicing psychiatrist.
And Doctor, if you will, could you please just explain your educational background for the board?
Absolutely. I graduated with my undergraduate degree in psychology from Harvard, magna cum laude, and also Phi Beta Kappa. From there, I went to Great State University, where I received my medical degree and also my doctorate in psychiatry.
Now, Doctor, how long have you been a practicing psychiatrist?
Well, I graduated from Great State in 1985, and I've had my own practice now for the past 20 years. I'm also part-time employed by Great State University for the past 5 years as their psychiatrist as well.
During the course of your time as a practicing psychiatrist, have you ever had the occasion to conduct any research of any kind?
Yes, I have, through actually my own private practice, hands-on, day-to-day with patients. I've been able to conduct some research through that. Also, as well, through my education and coming up through the ranks, I guess you could say. In that degree, I've also been able to conduct some research, and because of that, I've actually been able to publish several articles.
And could you please just briefly explain those articles to the board?
Yes, one is actually called Competency Determinations, where psychiatric principles and the law intersect. Another one is the recent trends in the diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders. Both of these deal in particular with schizophrenia.
At this time, Your Honors, I'd like to refer to what's been previously stipulated as Exhibit A. Let the record reflect I am showing an unmarked copy to opposing counsel.
Please proceed.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Dr. Pat, could you please identify this document for the court?
Yes, this is my curriculum vitae I had prepared for the court today.
And do you believe it's a fair and accurate representation of that document?
Yes, it is.
Doctor, during your time as a psychiatrist, have you ever had the occasion to obtain any professional appointments or memberships of any kind?
Yes, I have actually. I'm actually a member of the National Association of Psychiatrists.
Your Honors, at this time, in light of the stated education, experience, training, the research, and professional memberships of Dr. Pat, I would move to have him established as an expert in the field of clinical psychiatry.
Is there any objection from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right, without objection, please proceed.
Dr. Pat, I'd like to focus for a moment on your time specifically at the Great State University.
Okay.
During your time there, did you ever have the occasion to come into contact with the defendant in this case?
Yes, I did.
And could you please describe how you did come into contact with him?
I was actually approached by several of Terry's professors at Great State University. One in particular that's actually here today is Professor Albert. She had mentioned that she had an absolutely brilliant student in the first semester at Great State University in one of her math courses. And during the second semester, though, she had noticed a rapid decline in Mr. Bale's performance and actually in his appearance as well. And it just came to me to see if I might meet with him to maybe merely discuss some of the problems he was having or anything that I could do that I could help with.
After you were approached by the professors, what did you do next?
At this point, I went to the school records office to get a copy of his schedule. I went to wait outside one of his classrooms to merely see if I could approach him and talk to him. At that point, I met him outside of his classroom. I asked him if he would mind just taking a couple minutes out of his day and talking with me about some of the problems he was having or anything of that sort, and he agreed. So he came to my office and we just simply sat down and talked.
What sort of things did you discuss at that first meeting?
At our first meeting, we merely discussed any problems he was having adjusting at Great State University, problems that he might be having with professors, or just any sort of stress that he might be feeling while at Great State University.
Now, based on your education, your training, your experience, your research in the field, and your observations during this first interview with the defendant, did you have a conclusion to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty about his mental state at that time?
Yes.
What was that conclusion, doctor?
Based on the symptoms that he was exemplifying and also the concern of his professors, I diagnosed him initially with a depressed mood, mixed anxiety, and also adjustment disorder.
Now, doctor, after you made this initial diagnosis, did you ever see the defendant again?
Yes, we actually met several more times after this.
And what did you discuss at these later meetings?
Again, during these latter meetings, we merely discussed his time at Great State University, any problems that he might be having, any problems with professors. And actually during these latter meetings, there became a couple of things that became warnings to me, or if you could say, I guess, red signs that popped up to me.
What were these signs that you noticed in the later meetings, doctor?
In these latter meetings, he actually brought up these good forces that he said spoke to him, and also this beastie character, these hallucinations and delusions.
Now, Professor, based on your education, your training, your experience, your research in the field of psychiatry, and incorporating these later observations at these later meetings into your analysis, did you have a conclusion to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty about his mental state at that time?
Yes, I did.
And what was that conclusion, doctor?
Based on the earlier meetings I had had with him and the symptoms he exemplified then, and also with these latter meetings and these hallucinations and delusions, with all of that combined, I diagnosed him at this time with paranoid schizophrenia.
Now, doctor, you'd mentioned before that you diagnosed him with adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood. What led to this change of diagnosis?
Paranoid schizophrenia is actually very difficult to diagnose within a patient. The reason I gave him the initial diagnosis of the depressed mood, the mixed anxiety and adjustment disorder, was because of the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia actually can overlap with those of the depressed mood and other mental disorders. Also, there are some symptoms that one must exemplify for at least a month before they can be officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. The list of symptoms includes hallucinations and delusions, catatonic behavior, unable to communicate properly with others in the workplace or in the actual school environment. 2 of those symptoms must be exemplified within a person for at least a month. And also because these symptoms that one exemplifies when they have paranoid schizophrenia actually differs. The acuteness of those symptoms, whether they are exemplified at a higher level or a lower level, and also the number of symptoms differs greatly within a person.
Now, doctor, I'd like to focus on the events of July 29, 2005 at this time. Are you aware of what occurred on that day?
Yes, I am.
And prior to the events that occurred on July 29, did you ever have the occasion to meet with the defendant after that point?
After the 29th, I did have a meeting with him where I was able to talk over the events of that day with him.
And at this time, what did he indicate to you about the events of that day?
During the actual 29th and the events, he indicated to me that he saw an advertisement on television for this video game that he wanted. So naturally, he went to the store, Company Game of Stuff, where the video game was so he could purchase it. He had the desire, so he walked into the store. He went up to the shelf where the video game was, picked out the correct video game, walked up to the counter. He went through the mental math in his head to figure out that he did not have enough money for the game. $20 was not enough money to buy to purchase a $90 video game. At that point, he actually saw other avenues, such as asking his parents for the money. And he decided at that point that those avenues were not plausible if he indeed wanted the video game at that time. At this point, the clerk made an antagonizing remark, and at that point, I believe he actually picked up a screwdriver and stabbed the clerk in the chest.
Now, doctor, based on your education, your experience, your training, your research in your field, and coupling these observations with all the observations you've made in the past of the defendant, did you have a conclusion to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty about his mental state at the time of the incident?
Yes.
What was that conclusion, doctor?
He was able to reason and think logically. He went through a step-by-step process of reasoning. He had desire to go purchase the video game. He went through the mental math. He sought out other avenues. And as I heard Detective Kress testify here today, he actually decided to take the money from the register and leave the store with them.
Objection, Your Honor. According to mock trial rules, on direct examination, the witness is only allowed to testify to what is in the witness statement.
Your Honor, if I may respond, under Rule 703, experts are allowed to use facts that they overhear in court and have been admitted into evidence, as Detective Press's testimony has, to further their medical diagnosis, which is exactly what Dr. Pat is offering this statement for.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Counsel?
The surveillance video has not been admitted into evidence.
The rules of competition will supersede Rule 703 in this instance, so the objection is sustained.
Now, Dr. Pat, did you ever actually discuss the actual act of killing Mickey Jones with the defendant?
Yes, that was actually one of the main things that we talked about during this interview. He actually, Mr. Bale indicated to me that he knew what he did was wrong.
Now, based on your education, your training, your experience, and your observations of the defendant in this interview, if you encountered an individual who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and exhibited similar thought processes and actions as the defendant did in this instance, would you have a conclusion to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty about their moral culpability?
Yes.
And what would that conclusion be?
Based on the logical thought process he went through, the reasoning he went through, seeking out other avenues, he had the moral culpability
Objection,
of any
Your
person.
Honor. This calls for a legal opinion about moral culpability.
Your Honor, if I may respond, under Rule 704, experts are allowed to come to an opinion on ultimate issue as long as their testimony is based on their rational perceptions and observations and also their psychiatric experience, and he is basing these off all of those.
Your Honor, that refers to experts in that field. This is not, Dr. Pat is not an expert in any field of legal issues. He is an expert in psychiatry.
The court will overrule the objection, permit the testimony to stand, and permit cross-examination on this subject.
Now, Dr. Pat, also based on what you observed of the defendant during your interview and also based on your education, your training, your experience, and your research in your field, do you have a conclusion to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty about the reasoning behind the crime that Mr. Bale committed?
Yes, I do.
And what was that conclusion?
He wanted to purchase the video game, and also the actual act of stabbing the clerk in the chest. It was because of the antagonizing statement that the clerk had made, and also Terry indicated to me in our interview that the clerk was actually a bully in past history throughout all of high school, and I believe it was because of this past history and also because of the antagonizing remark that the actual stabbing occurred.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Is there cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Counsel, you may inquire.
May I proceed?
You may inquire.
Mr. Bale suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Schizophrenia is a mental disorder involving psychotic symptoms and disordered thinking, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Disordered thinking, which involves difficulties remembering,
That
correct?
is one, yes.
Difficulties focusing and problem solving, correct?
Those are all part of it, yes.
Common symptoms include outbursts of anger,
That is one of the common symptoms.
unusual behavior,
Another one among others.
loss of interest in school or work,
Again, another one among others, yes.
or an unreasonable fear of something, correct?
Another common symptoms among many, yes.
Children often act in these ways, don't they, doctor?
Actually, I'm merely a psychiatrist to adults. I don't see many children.
So, am I correct in saying that you don't think that children ever have tantrums or are afraid of anything?
I believe all people have, to a degree, have some extent of these.
Isn't it true, Dr. Pat, that the progression of schizophrenia may be sudden or gradual?
It depends on the person. Each case of schizophrenia must be taken from a case-by-case basis.
Well, in your meetings with professors such as Professor Albert, it was evident that Mr. Bale had a sudden change in grades and demeanor, correct?
That was part of why Professor Albert and various other professors came to me, because of somewhat of a disturbing decline in not only his appearance but also his grades.
Mr. Bale is a top student in high school and in his first semester at GSU, correct?
I believe as far as math went, he was one of the top students. That's correct.
So he obviously knew how to engage in logical reasoning at that time, right?
Yes.
But because the progression of schizophrenia can be sudden or gradual, his ability to reason things out could suddenly change as well. Isn't that true?
Any paranoid schizophrenics could change at different times.
So their ability to reason things out could change.
It
correct?
could. It depends on the person.
You weren't with Mr. Bale when he committed the crime, were you?
No, actually, I believe Mr. Bale and Mr. Jones were the only two in the store at the time of
You only
the crime.
you only spoke to him afterwards?
Objection, Your Honor, as to relevance. Under the rules of expert testimony, Dr. Pat is allowed to reach his conclusions whether or not he was in the store at the time, simply based off his interviews with the defendant afterward.
All right. Objection will be overruled. You can answer the question.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
You only spoke to Mr. Bale after the crime, correct?
That is correct, seeing as no one was actually in the store with either two of those people at the time.
And after the crime, Mr. Bale told you that his actions were wrong, correct?
Yes, that is correct. He indicated to me that what he did was wrong.
But because of the sudden changes in schizophrenia, his concept of right and wrong could have been completely different at the time of the crime. Isn't that true?
With Terry, I believe that he knew his actions were wrong at the time of the crime because of the interview I had with him and because of my time at Gary State University with him.
But, Doctor, you just testified that a schizophrenic's ability to reason things out could suddenly change with the progression of schizophrenia, correct?
I said it depends on case by case, but in Terry's case, I believe he knew right from wrong, and what he did was wrong at the time that he committed the act.
But because of the sudden changes in schizophrenia, his ability to reason what's right and wrong could have suddenly changed.
Objection, Your Honor. This is calling for the witness to speculate beyond what he knows. He can only base his observations and his medical opinions on what he perceived at the time of the interview. This question inherently calls for him to speculate as to what might have happened.
May I respond, Your Honor? This is an expert witness who has been qualified as an expert in psychiatry. It is his job to be able to tell what could have happened and what was going on inside Mr. Bale's mind and at the time of the crime.
Any further response?
Well, Your Honor, I would again contend that what Dr. Pat is here to testify to is his medical opinion based on his observations of the defendant in his interviews with the defendant. I would again state that I don't believe he should be called upon by the court to speculate as to what could happen, as he's already testified that paranoid schizophrenia affects different people differently.
Since he's here as an expert, we'll let him provide his expert opinion. The objection is noted, overruled, and you may proceed.
Dr. Pat, because his ability to reason things out could change, a schizophrenic's ability to reason things could change. His reasoning of right and wrong could have changed at the time of the crime. Isn't that true?
I don't believe that was the case with Mr. Bale.
When you first met with Mr. Bale, you asked him about his grades, didn't you?
Yes, we discussed various things, including his grades and his personal life.
He claimed to be doing the same amount of work that he has always done, but that Professor Albert didn't like him because of a certain incident in class, correct?
Yes, he did bring this incident up.
In fact, Mr. Bale told you that none of his professors liked him or other students. Isn't that true?
Yes, this was one of the things that we talked over, and he did make that statement.
So he had a thought about his professors, right?
During that one meeting, he did think about that, yes.
But it was a distorted thought process of what was going on around him, wasn't it?
Distorted how?
The fact that he thought that all of his teachers didn't like him or other students, that was obviously a distorted thought process.
Well, that's just merely how it appeared to him. Everybody takes everything differently. To him, that's how it appeared to him to be.
Now, Dr. Pat, that obviously wasn't reality, correct?
I don't know. I wasn't with him on a day-to-day basis, and I can't speak towards the action of what happened to him.
Dr. Pat, are you telling me that it is a possibility that none of the GSU professors liked any of their students?
I believe Mr. Bale was actually saying that none of the teachers liked him in particular. That's what I said in my statement.
So he didn't say that the professors didn't like other students?
He may have indicated other students, but I believe he was talking about him, and the professors didn't like him in particular.
Dr. Pat, do you remember giving a deposition in this case?
Yes, I do.
And when you gave that deposition, you were sworn in?
That is correct.
Your Honors, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Please follow along with me as I read.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper impeachment. No foundation has been laid for this document.
Would you care to respond, Counsel?
Your Honors, I'm simply trying to prove that what he just said was incorrect, and I'm going to prove with him in his statement that he's going against what his statement said.
Okay, we'll overrule the objection and let counsel proceed.
Follow along with me as I read lines 65 and 66. Terry went on to tell me about how no professors like him or other students. Did I read that correctly?
That is correct, yes. When he referred to other students, though, he wasn't talking about all students. He was talking about different students in particular.
So, but he did say that professors didn't like other students.
Objection, Your Honor. This question's been asked and answered.
Overruled.
But he did say that professors didn't like other students, correct?
Referring to particular students, not the student body as a whole.
So it is quite possible and probable that his thought process was distorted about what was going on around him.
No, not at all. People don't like other people. It's a natural sense. Some people, for one reason or another, don't like particular traits of another person. As I stated before, his professors, he might have felt as his professors did not like him for one reason or another.
Thank you, Dr.
That was his
Pat.
perception.
During one of your last few sessions with Mr. Bale, he told you that when BC takes human form, he had to kill it or many others would die, correct?
During the time at Gracie University, which was around 2 months before the actual incident, he did make this statement.
And after the crime, he said that he thought the clerk was the beast he was called to fight, correct?
Actually, that's the interesting part. He actually made a contradictory statement to that while we were in our meeting.
But Dr. Pat, he did say that.
In a contradictory form,
But he did say that.
Yes, but he also contradicted that statement. But yes.
That's all I asked for. So in Mr. Bale's mind, BC had taken human form, and he therefore had to kill him in order to save many people, correct?
He made the statement about killing BC 2 months beforehand while he was at Gracie University.
So he made the statement that if BC takes human form, he must kill him, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Overruled.
So he made the statement that if BC takes human form, he must kill him, correct?
2 months prior to the incident.
And after the crime, he said that he thought the clerk was the beast he was called to fight, correct?
He made that statement, also contradicted.
So therefore, he thought that the clerk was the beast he was called to fight, and that's why he killed him, correct?
He also knew that the clerk was the actual person, Mickey Jones, because he had stated that the clerk was actually...
But he said that the clerk was the beast he was called to fight.
Your Honor, I would ask that opposing counsel allow my witness to finish his response to the question.
Sustained. Counsel, you will give the witness an opportunity to answer the questions, and I think we've gone into this now 3 times, so move on.
There is no beastie, is there, Doctor?
As far as, in particular to who? I'm sorry.
That beastie does not really exist, does he?
No, he doesn't. It's merely a hallucination of Mr. Bale.
So Mr. Bale's thought about the clerk at the time of the crime was distorted.
Slightly distorted, but he still knew who the clerk was as a person.
But it was distorted.
Slightly, but he was still able to
Thank
reason
you.
and think logically.
You specialize in schizophrenia, correct?
That's one of the subcategories that I specialize in.
Isn't it true that upon first evaluation, you diagnosed Mr. Bale with adjustment disorder.
Among a depressed mood and also mixed anxiety.
So your first diagnosis of Mr. Bale was different than your last, correct?
Yes, because of the overlapping of the symptoms that Mr. Bale exemplified.
Dr. Pat, a schizophrenic person has trouble thinking clearly, correct?
It depends on the person. One person under counseling and medication will be able to think clearly and go through a logical reasoning process.
They also have trouble managing emotions and interacting appropriately with others, correct?
Depending on the case, those are some of the symptoms.
With your specialty in mental disorders, the mentally retarded have these same troubles, don't they, doctor?
Actually, I don't see mentally retarded people, so I can't actually testify to that.
You do have a specialty in mental disorders, don't you?
Mental disorders, yes, but personally, I do not see those with mental retardation.
So are you saying with your specialty in mental disorders, you cannot testify to whether or not a mentally retarded person has trouble interacting appropriately with others?
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. They do have trouble interacting with people, but I believe that's as a whole category. Paranoid schizophrenics, as case by case, can actually interact with people on a day-to-day basis.
So, Dr. Bat, mentally retarded people as a whole, they have trouble managing emotions, interacting appropriately with others, and thinking clearly. Is that correct?
Those are some of the symptoms.
Thank you. Isn't it true that during each stage of the schizophrenia, these symptoms vary with treatment?
Each stage, depending case by case, again, each person exemplifies each symptoms differently and also the acuteness of those symptoms.
They also vary with how developed and active the disorder is, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So depending on the stage of the disorder a person is experiencing, he could be affected with more or less severity than other times, correct?
Well, not only the stage, but also, again, from person to person, the paranoid schizophrenia actually differs greatly in the symptoms and also the level of those symptoms.
So that's a yes, that they could be affected more severely at other times?
Depending on the person.
So Mr. Bale could have been affected more severely at the time of the crime?
Anything's possible, but through my interview with him, I don't believe that he was.
But he could have been?
During my interview and through the observations I made, I do not believe that he was.
When you tried to get Mr. Bale on medication, he had a sudden outburst, correct?
Which time? I'm sorry.
When you tried to get him on medication for the mixed anxiety disorder.
When I recommended that he go on a mild antidepressant while he was at Great State University, he became somewhat angry with me because I merely suggested something that went against something that he believed in.
And he stormed out of the room with that teenage angst type of attitude, correct?
I guess you could say that, yes.
Medicine is not really a cure for paranoid schizophrenics, is it, doctor?
No, unfortunately, there is no cure for paranoid schizophrenia. However, with medication and also the proper counseling, we get it down to a level where they can reason and function day to day.
It is simply a way of treating some symptoms, right?
So they can get to a level of reasoning and thought process where they can manage day to day.
So it is common to still have some moments of confused thinking, even on the medication. Isn't that true, doctor?
These can happen depending on the person and also the level of medication and counseling they're receiving.
In Terry's mind, Beast had to be stopped, even if it meant hurting or killing an innocent person, correct?
He made this statement to me 2 months before the incident, but yes, he did make that mention of this statement.
And this aspect probably contributed to the incident?
That was a very small part of it, but again...
But it could have contributed to the incident?
A small part of it.
Dr. Pat, this is not a reasoned and clear thought process, is it?
Which part?
The fact that he thought that hurting or killing an innocent person didn't matter.
In his mind, at that time, I believe that he was going through a reasonable thought process.
But that was not a reasoned thought process there.
At that particular moment, with that very small part of the piece of the puzzle.
That's a no?
Objection, Your Honor. Time has elapsed.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Is there redirect examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Dr. Pat, based on your education, your training, your experience, your research in your field, do paranoid schizophrenics possess reasoning abilities?
Yes, they do.
And based on your education, your training, your experience, your research in your field and your interviews with the defendant after the incident, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty about whether he was reasoning at the time of the incident?
Yes, I do.
And what was that opinion?
He was able to reason. He went through a reasonable thought process. He went through different steps, sought out different avenues, and made decisions and conclusions for
Objection,
himself.
Your Honor. This testimony has already been heard on direct examination.
Overruled. It'll stand.
Now, Doctor, opposing counsel brought up the idea of treating paranoid schizophrenics with medication. During your interviews with the defendant, did you become aware of any treatment he was undergoing?
Yes, after he left my care at Great State University, he actually made mention that he had been seeing a psychiatrist and had actually been receiving medication for his paranoid schizophrenia.
And based on what he indicated to you, how did this medication affect him?
It was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It helped suppress the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia so that he could get down to a level of reasoning so he could function day to day and interact clearly.
And just for clarification, doctor, when an individual is on this medication, how do they act in relation to a normal individual?
As closely as they can with paranoid schizophrenia, they can reason, they can think logically, they can come up with different thought processes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Will there be recross?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. The witness is excused.
Thank you, sir.
I understand that the state has no additional witnesses to present.
No, Your Honor. At this time, we would like to move Exhibit A into evidence.
All right. Without objection, it will be admitted.
The state rests, Your Honor.
Thank you. Does the defense wish to proceed with the case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Professor Elizabeth Albert.
All right. Thank you. Would you come forward, please, Professor? You've already been sworn. You may take a seat in the witness chair. Thank you. Counsel, you may inquire.
Good afternoon. Could you please state your name and occupation for the court?
My name is Elizabeth Albert, and I'm a math professor at Great State University.
What all have you been involved in at the university?
I have been teaching advanced math at Great State for 17 years now. More recently, I have served a 5-year term as the chair of the mathematics department. I've also published over 50 academic articles in journals.
Now, during your time at GSU, when did you first meet the defendant, Mr. Terry Bale?
I met Terry when he enrolled in one of my freshman courses in the fall of 2004.
Excuse me. And what did this course involve?
This was a highly rigorous course. Most of the students in the course are in the honors program at Great State University. I have great expectations for my students, and they need to come to class with a lot of preparation.
What do you specifically remember about Mr. Bale upon first meeting him?
The first time I recall Mr. Bale was when the first day of class, he sat in the back of the classroom. I arranged my classrooms all alphabetically, so I remember specifically directing Terry to the front of the classroom.
And how did you take to Mr. Bale?
Oh, I was impressed with his intelligence immediately.
What impressed you?
The first day, once again, I unveiled one of my latest accomplishments, as I do in most of my classes. It's a formula for the string theory, and Terry politely raised his hand and told me that my theory was incorrect, my formula was, and it didn't comply with another theory. Well, this was slightly embarrassing in front of a class of 100 students. It really caused me to pay close attention to Terry after this point.
And how was your relationship with Mr. Bale after that first day?
I believe ours was solid for a student-teacher relationship. Terry would come to my office before class, and we would discuss homework and problems he had with anything before the classes began.
How long did these visits continue?
These were quite frequent. However, I said a comment to him, something to the effect of him catching on quickly for his rural upbringing. Of course, I didn't mean it in an offensive manner, as I myself am from a rural upbringing as well. He actually took it in a very offensive manner.
And how exactly did he react, Professor?
He slammed up his books, he left my office without saying a word, and he never came back again.
How did Mr. Bale end up doing in this first semester course?
He did very well. In fact, he was one of my top students in that class, and he enrolled in my next semester class, which is more difficult, but I believe would provide an excellent challenge for Terry.
And as this course began, how was Terry doing?
At the beginning of this course, he answered every question when called upon correctly. I still had high expectations for him in this course. However, his behavior became slightly odd. I wouldn't say to the point of concerning as at this point, but he would say things, for instance, under his breath or out loud commenting on the other students' work on the classroom board.
What else, if anything, did these behavior changes include?
As the semester continued, he became more and more non-conforming. He would say things as if he was talking to someone who wasn't present in the room or himself.
And how did this compare with his behavior from the first semester?
It was strikingly different from the star pupil I had that first semester. I would almost go to the point and the extent of saying it was alarming.
Alarming, how so?
On more than one occasion, Terry left my classroom while I was teaching the class and its progress without explanation at the time.
Now, what did you do when he did this?
I tried to confront him on the issue. However, the only answer he would give me was something to the effect of, "I have to do what I do, you don't know what's going on right now."
How did Mr. Bale act in class after this exchange?
His answers became short, argumentative, and even rude. I would go as far as to say from my mathematical standpoint that his answers in my class were illogical. He didn't answer even the simplest questions correctly.
What else, if anything, did you notice about Mr. Bale?
I noticed that sometimes in class, he would be looking out the window and laughing at something that no one else in the room could understand. His responses in my class would sometimes be interrupted by long pauses or unintelligible speech.
Were there any other changes from the first semester?
Absolutely. His appearance and his grades changed dramatically from that first semester.
How did his appearance change?
The first semester, Terry was a skinny, well-dressed, always cleanly shaven young man. That second semester, he came to class as if he hadn't showered for several days. He had a noticeable weight gain, and he looked really unkempt.
What were Mr. Bale's grades like for the second semester?
The beginning of that semester, he kept his grade up. He was answering all my questions correctly. However, halfway through that semester, he dropped all the way down to a marginal C- student. He no longer came to class prepared and was just not able to do well in the class.
How did you respond?
I went up to him and asked for if he had any explanation for his behavior and his grades, and he didn't give me any response. So I talked to Dr. Pat about how his sudden behavior and grades were changing.
And what did you hear back from Mr. Bale or Dr. Pat about these meetings?
Objection, Your Honor, compound question.
Before I had a chance to talk to either one of them, I received notice that Terry was no longer going to be coming to Great State University for that second year.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Is there cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may inquire.
Yes. Now, you stated that in the second semester, the defendant took a follow-up mathematics course, correct?
Excuse me, what kind of methods?
A follow-up mathematics course to the first semester.
Oh,
correct?
yes.
And this was more advanced than the first semester course, correct?
It was along the same track.
But in fact, it was even more difficult in the first semester course, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, it was.
The defendant got a C- in this second semester course, didn't he?
As an overall grade, he started out the semester doing very
Professor,
well.
excuse me, so he did in fact get a C- though?
For the final grade, he did.
And he was at the ranked at the bottom of the class, wasn't he?
Unfortunately, he was.
But in the first semester, the defendant got an A, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He was one of my top students.
So in effect, by the end of the second semester, the defendant had dropped from an A to a C-, hadn't he?
Yes, dramatic change.
And by the end of the second semester, the defendant had gone from the top of the class to the bottom of the class, correct?
That is correct.
And now, isn't it true that by the end of the after the end of the second semester, the defendant dropped out of the university, didn't he?
Well, he finished the semester class. He just he did not come for
So in
his
fact,
sophomore
he
year.
did drop out, though.
Oh, yes, he did.
The defendant killed Mickey Jones after the second semester, correct?
Yes, that is true.
So in fact, the defendant killed Mickey Jones after his grades fell from an A to a C minus, didn't he?
That would be the case.
The defendant killed Mickey Jones after his rank fell from being at the top of the class to the bottom of the class, correct?
That is correct.
And the defendant killed Mickey Jones after he dropped out of the university, correct?
I believe I already answered this question, but yes, he did.
Now, let's go back to the beginning of the first semester. You took an interest in the defendant on the first day of class, didn't you?
Absolutely.
In fact, you were so interested that you went and looked up the defendant's records after class, correct?
I did.
And isn't it true that the defendant was one of your brightest students, wasn't he?
One of the brightest students I've ever had.
And isn't it also true that you paid more attention to the defendant than you paid to any other student in your recent memory, didn't you?
Absolutely.
You referred the defendant to Dr. Pat in the second semester, correct?
That is correct.
And isn't it true that the defendant was the only student you referred to Dr. Pat in your whole teaching career, correct?
That is true. I've never felt the need to refer anyone else to Dr. Pat.
You referred the defendant to Dr. Pat because you were concerned about his falling grades, weren't you?
Also his demeanor and behavior in my class.
But the falling grades were one of the reasons. Right?
Oh, definitely.
Isn't it? So in fact, referring the defendant to Dr. Pat was in the defendant's best interest, wasn't it?
I believe so.
And isn't it also true that when you learned that the defendant was dropping out at the end of the second semester, you were disappointed, weren't you?
I was terribly disappointed that I didn't get the opportunity to teach the once excellent student that I had.
And isn't it also true that when you learned of the murder charges, because the defendant killed Mickey Jones, when you learned of those charges, you were saddened, weren't you?
I'm always saddened when someone dies, but I was saddened that also that I knew the person who was responsible.
So in fact, you wouldn't want any harm to come to the defendant, would you?
I would not want any harm to come to anyone, actually.
But you wouldn't want any harm to come to the defendant, would you, correct?
Oh, that's correct.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Will there be redirect examination?
No, Your Honor.
All right, redirect being waived. You may step down. You're excused, Professor. Thank you. Will you call your next witness, please?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Dr. Barbara Goodwell to testify.
Dr. Goodwell, step forward, please. You're already under oath. You may have a seat in the witness chair.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Counsel, you may inquire.
Thank you. Could you please state your name and occupation for the record?
My name is Dr. Barbara Goodwell. I am a psychiatrist.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been previously stipulated as Exhibit B?
Yes, you may.
May the record reflect that I am showing an unmarked counsel to opposing counsel. Do you, Your Honors, have a copy of Exhibit B?
We do not.
Would you like a copy?
You might as well pass it to Judge McBride.
Could you identify this document, Doctor?
Could I have a copy?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Could you identify the document, Doctor?
Well, this seems to be a list of my credentials.
May the record reflect that the witness has correctly identified the exhibit.
It will so reflect.
Dr. Goodwell, what formal education do you have in psychiatry?
I received my undergraduate degree from the Riverside University, and I received my MD in 1965 from Wishwell State.
And what certification do you have in the same field?
I am board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. I am also a licensed psychiatrist in the state.
Is that correctly represented by the exhibit, Doctor?
Yes, it is.
Could you please give a brief summary of your history in psychiatry?
Right. Well, I completed my residency in 1969, so I've been active in the field for approximately 37 years. I have worked in private practice, I have worked in the hospital setting, and I also have worked in academia. Nearly 6 of those years, I served as the chair of the Department of Mental Health Sciences at Great State University.
Doctor, is the exhibit correct in this regard?
Yes, it is.
Have you had experience with a paranoid schizophrenic before?
I have encountered paranoid schizophrenics in both my private practice as well as in the hospital.
Have you published works on the schizophrenic?
I have actually authored several works on the paranoid schizophrenic.
And would you take a moment to review the document and make sure that your works are correctly represented on this exhibit?
Yes, they are.
Thank you, Doctor. You may place the exhibit aside now. Your Honor, at this time I ask that this court recognize Dr. Goodwell as an expert in paranoid schizophrenia.
Is there any objection from the state?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, I would object on the grounds that nowhere indicated on Dr. Goodwell's curriculum vitae as submitted to the court is any specified specialization in paranoid schizophrenia, nor do any of her articles listed pertain specifically to that disorder.
May I respond, Your Honor? Under the selected publication section of this CV, why does schizophrenia happen in good families? Schizophrenia Yesterday and Today are both works that this doctor has published on schizophrenia.
Your Honor, if I may respond, it was my contention that paranoid schizophrenia specifically is nowhere listed on the vitae.
Any further response, counsel?
I believe that the defense would be happy with her qualification in schizophrenia.
Then the court will overrule the objection and permit her to testify as an expert in that field.
Thank you, Your Honor. What is schizophrenia, Doctor?
Schizophrenia is a very serious mental illness that has very powerful effects on its victims, if you will. Unfortunately, there is no cure.
What are some common symptoms of schizophrenia?
Schizophrenia is characterized by auditory and visual hallucinations and delusions. Schizophrenics are said to have an impaired sense of self, and voices are said to make a running inner commentary.
Could you please explain more about the inner commentary of a schizophrenic?
Well, the schizophrenic not only hears the voices, they actually feel that the voices are inside their heads. They are unable to distinguish them from reality.
Before you stated that schizophrenics have an impaired sense of self, what did you mean by that?
Well, this is not to say that the schizophrenic lacks self-confidence. Rather, it means that the voices and hallucinations will become such an integral part of the schizophrenic's life and thought process that they cannot distinguish them from reality. They influence impulses and behaviors, even though a schizophrenic may still, for instance, know right from wrong.
What does that lead to, Doctor?
This can lead to highly distorted thinking, and the voices and hallucinations will become an important part of the schizophrenic's life and thought process.
Now, moving to the specific case of one schizophrenic, how did you come to know Terry Bale?
I was approached by Terry Bale's parents in late May 2005.
Why did Terry's parents recommend him to you?
They were very concerned about the changes they had seen in their son. He went from a very excellent student, someone who always cared about his appearance, to someone who didn't care about his appearance. He had bad personal hygiene, he didn't care about his grades, and they also said that he would have angry outbursts while on the phone with them. They also found some of his drawings, which they considered particularly disturbing.
What did those drawings depict, Doctor?
Well, each of these drawings would show a bloody battle between a monster, Beastie, who would always appear in various animal and human forms. He was never quite the same. And a hero, T the Great. There was also a code written in panels on the outside of these drawings. They were spoken by undrawn characters that urged T the Great to kill Beastie and to save the world.
And once you began treating Terry, how did your first session with him go?
At first, Terry really did not want to talk to me, but after a while, I kind of got him to open up.
And what did he tell you about?
He told me about his time in high school. He had been an excellent math student. He had swam the 1,500 meter, and he played clarinet in the high school band. However, despite all of these things, I really got a sense that he was a loner, that he didn't socialize with his peers.
What specifically did you ask Terry about?
I asked him about the drawings.
And what did he tell you about these drawings?
He told me about Beastie. He said that Beastie was evil and that therefore he must die or else other human beings would perish. He responded by saying that it was everyone's responsibility to look out for this Beastie creature before it tricked us again.
What did you conclude about these drawings, Doctor?
About the drawings?
Yes.
Well, I concluded that these drawings were concerning to me because they showed me that something was wrong with the patient.
Did Terry tell you anything else concerning?
Well, Terry told me about good voices, and these good voices were warm and nurturing and caring. He said that they had helped him through every stressful situation he had encountered at Great State University. And he told me that at the end of the first semester, when he had received good grades, they were more excited about these good grades than even his parents.
Now, at the end of your very first session with Terry, what did you conclude about him?
I concluded he was a paranoid schizophrenic.
How did you plan to treat his schizophrenia?
The same way I treat all of my paranoid schizophrenic patients, with medication and with counseling.
Are there long-term consequences of this type of treatment, doctor?
Well, drug therapy is a double-edged sword. The medication will take away the order of the schizophrenic's life as they once knew it, creating a state of confusion. In Terry's case, the good voices which had helped him through all of these stressful situations became dormant. This reduced his ability to rationally reason and to understand the world around him.
Are there any concerning physical side effects of treatment with Haldol?
Well, Haldol can lead to Parkinson's syndrome, constipation, dry mouth, sleepiness, occasional blurred vision, and weight gain.
Doctor, of these side effects, both short and long-term, which did Terry experience?
Regrettably, the patient experienced all of them.
What was Terry doing in his day-to-day life?
Well, he had dropped out of the Great State University. His hours at his job had been reduced. He was working very menial labor, restocking shelves. He started playing video games an awful lot, and he really didn't have any friends.
Could Terry's lifestyle have affected his treatment?
Yes, it could have. In Terry's worst psychotic state, he knew that the good voices were good and that Beastie was evil. In his medicated state, he led an empty life. These good voices that had helped him through all of these situations became dormant.
Was Terry's habit of playing video games concerning to you?
Well, he seemed to fill his somewhat empty life with these video games. He even told me in our second session he believed the key to destroying Beastie was withheld in the games.
Doctor, as an expert in schizophrenia, do you have an opinion based on a reasonable degree of medical and scientific probability about how Terry's obsession with video games may have played out on the day of the murder?
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion, doctor?
Well, Terry went into the store to purchase what is my understanding to be a $90 game with $20. This is a game that he thought that he needed to help destroy Beastie. The clerk laughed at him. Now, most of us, when we were in this situation, we may have gotten slightly annoyed. However, we would not have committed a crime. For Terry, however, this created a very stressful situation, which cracked his already diminished grasp on reality. He thought that perhaps the clerk was an emissary of Beastie sent to rip off all of the decent customers. At this point in time, his real world came into contact with his delusional one.
Have you spoken with Terry since the murder?
Yes, I have.
Now, could Bale's medication and mental illness have affected his interrogation?
During the interrogation, his responses could have appeared.
Objection, Your Honor, as to relevance. Given the defendant's prior conviction in the guilt phase of the trial, I don't believe exploring the validity of his confession has any relevance on his moral culpability today.
May I respond, Your Honor? While neither side challenges the validity of Terry's confession, we have to remember that this case is not just about Terry Bale. It's about all other schizophrenics. Terry's confession and the proceedings of his trial serve as a model for what we may use to determine schizophrenics may experience during their time in court.
All right. Court has considered that the objection is well taken and sustained. Move to another area.
Doctor, do you have an opinion based on a reasonable degree of medical and scientific probability on Terry's state of mind on the day of the murder?
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion, doctor?
It is my expert opinion that Terry could neither control his impulses nor rationally reason on the day of the murder. Clearly, Terry knew and knows that killing is morally and legally wrong. However, schizophrenics, despite taking medication, have a diminished control over their impulses. And I think that these factors greatly impacted what happened on the day of the murder.
Thank you, doctor. And thank you, Your Honors. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Will there be a cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Now, Dr. Goodwell, you stated on direct that you do know the defendant, correct?
I do know him, yes.
And you originally became aware of his situation in late May of 2005 after speaking with his parents, is that correct?
That is absolutely right.
Now, after you spoke with his parents, you had approximately 8 meetings with him prior to July 29?
Yes, it's unfortunate I only got to meet with him 8 times.
Well, nonetheless, some of the things that you discussed with Mr. Bale at these meetings, one of them was his high school years, correct?
Yes, we did discuss this.
And he actually you became aware through this discussion that he had been in the top of his class in mathematics, correct?
Yes, this is correct.
Now, you'd agree as well that the notebooks that his parents gave to you when they recommended that he come see you were also from this similar point in time, his high school career?
They were his high school notebooks.
And so you'd agree that despite having these drawings, he did still perform excellently in academics, correct?
That is correct.
Now, I'm going to fast forward to some other things that he spoke to you about. One of those things was the idea of this creature called Beastie in the Good Voices, correct?
He did speak to me about this.
And as a result of that, you came to the conclusion that he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia?
Well, along with this and with the drawings that I had witnessed.
Well, that was one factor though, right, Doctor?
Oh, absolutely, that was a factor.
Now, after you came to the conclusion that he did suffer from paranoid schizophrenia, you then decided that the best course of action would be to treat him with your continued counseling in an antipsychotic drug known as Haldol, correct?
Absolutely, that's how you treat paranoid schizophrenic patients.
Now, what you did with this medication specifically, though, was you used the rule of 5 to balance the side effects with the efficacy of the medication, correct?
That is correct.
Now, when you originally applied this rule of 5, you prescribed him 5 milligrams, correct?
That is correct. You want to tailor the level of the drug that you're giving for how each patient will react to the medication.
Right, and that was a daily dose as well, correct?
Yes, it was.
Now, you'd agree that the effects that this medication had on Terry were that they actually made his forces, good voices, his hallucinations dormant, correct, Doctor?
Yes, they did clear up his thinking some.
Right, and you'd agree that inherently paranoid schizophrenics do possess some rational reasoning abilities?
Some rational reasoning abilities, which are still diminished, even on
But they
medication.
do possess those abilities, correct?
Some, yes.
And they possess similar moral reasoning abilities as well?
They may have an ability to morally reason.
And now, you testified on direct examination that after the incident, Mr. Bale did indicate to you that he knew and knows that killing is morally and legally wrong, correct?
He does, but his ability to rationally
Dr.
reason...
Goodwell, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you simply, did he indicate to
May I
you?
respond, Your Honor? Objection, I'm sorry. The witness is not allowed...
You have to object before you can respond.
I'm sorry.
You're doing just fine. Go ahead, make your objection.
I believe the witness was trying to clarify her statement, and counsel would not let her completely answer the question.
All right, the counsel will permit the witness to answer the question. You may finish your answer.
I just wanted to say that despite knowing that killing is morally and legally wrong, schizophrenics have a diminished capacity to understand their world around them and to control their impulses despite taking medication.
Now, well, first, Your Honor, I'd move to strike that last portion of the testimony as non-responsive to my question.
Okay, we'll let it stand. You can put another question to the witness, please.
Well, Dr. Goodwell, you'd agree that on the day of the crime, he did take his Haldol at 4 a.m.?
He had taken his medication.
And you'd also agree that at 6 a.m., just 2 hours later, he was woken up by his neighbor's dog, correct?
That is what he told me, yes.
And at that time, he became irritable?
He said he remembered being irritable at that time.
Now, at approximately 2:35 p.m., that was the time of day that he entered the Combi Games and Stuff store, correct?
That's my understanding.
And when he entered that store, he intended to purchase a $90 game, correct?
Yes, with $20. He thought
Right. And he realized later that he did not have enough money to do so, correct?
That is correct.
Now, when he entered the store, you'd agree that that was within the 24-hour window of the daily dose of Haldol that he had been prescribed by you?
Yes, it was.
And furthermore, you would agree that the effects of his paranoid schizophrenia are less severe when he is on this medication, correct?
They are less severe.
And in fact, you would agree that the majority of those hallucinations and such are made dormant by the effects of this medication.
They are made dormant, and this is allows the schizophrenic to clear up their thinking some. However, this creates a state of much confusion for the patient.
However, it does organize their thoughts a little bit better, right?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Will there be any further examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Doctor, what were the goals of your treatment of Terry with Haldol?
Treatment of a schizophrenic is a very long process. It takes a lifetime of medication and a lifetime of counseling. Though, despite taking medication and counseling, the schizophrenic may still experience symptoms of their disease.
You said it takes a lifetime to treat a patient. How many times did you meet with Terry?
Regrettably, I only got to meet with the defendant, with Terry Bale for 8 times.
Was that enough time for you to adequately treat Terry?
Absolutely not. As I said, there's really no ending point to treating a schizophrenic. It's a lifelong process.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honors. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. In light of the redirect examination, is there a recross examination of this
Just
witness?
briefly, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Goodwell, you would agree with me that despite only having 8 sessions prior to July 29, you did take the standard course of action in treating paranoid schizophrenia, correct?
Yes.
And that was to mitigate the symptoms via counseling and medication, correct?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Dr. Goodwell, thank you for your testimony. You're excused. You may step down from the witness chair. At this point, the court understands that the defense has no additional witnesses to present. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense rests.
All right. Is there any exhibit to offer in resting or not, counsel?
Your Honor, I believe the exhibits have already been entered.
All right. Thank you. Then what the court will do is take a very brief 2-minute recess and permit counsel to prepare for preparation of final argument. Will the bailiff recess the court, please? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Court is back in session. You may be seated. At this point, the court will hear final argument from counsel. Our prearranged sequence is that the state of Ohio will address us initially, and then the defense counsel will have the opportunity, and then there will be a final rebuttal opportunity afforded to the state. Are counsel prepared to proceed at this point on behalf of the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
On behalf of the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, we'll hear from the counsel. Mr. Prosecutor?
Your Honors, the issues in today's case are simple. First, does there need to be a national consensus to justify an exemption for paranoid schizophrenics from the death penalty? Second, does the execution of paranoid schizophrenic defendants measurably justify society's purposes of retribution and deterrence? And third, do paranoid schizophrenics as a class suffer from such a diminished moral culpability that they cannot be held accountable for the death penalty? Now, as to the first issue of national consensus, Your Honors, both cases, Atkins versus Virginia and Roper versus Simmons that defense relies upon today for your verdict on this motion have been established by the principle of a national legislative consensus. In fact, Justice Stevens went so far in Atkins versus Virginia to define that the best objective indicia of society's prevailing standards of decency in death penalty jurisprudence is defined by a consensus of the state's legislatures. On the issue of paranoid schizophrenia, Your Honors, no state has granted a statutory death exclusion for paranoid schizophrenics as a class of individuals. Therefore, rulings based on consensus in Atkins and Simmons are unjustified in this case. Now, as to the issues of retribution and deterrence, retribution can be defined as what punishment befits a certain defendant's crime, and it's best defined by their moral culpability. Now, you've heard testimony today about the thought processes that the defendant went through while he was in CompU games and stuff. You heard testimony from Dr. Pat, the state's expert witness, who testified to you that not only did he go through a logical process, he fulfilled the justifications and the tests set forth in Atkins for moral culpability. He understood and processed information when he took in that he did not have enough money for the game by subtracting the $90 cost from the $20 in his pocket. He reasoned that then he might be able to ask his parents for the money. But then he decided that that would not be a plausible course of action, Your Honors, because he wouldn't be able to get the game and his self-satisfaction at that exact juncture. Now, you've heard from Dr. Goodwell that Mr. Bale was addicted to video games. That's why he wanted the game. He took Haldol to suppress his paranoid schizophrenic symptoms at 4 a.m. on the day of the crime, and thus he was not suffering from them in the store. What he was suffering from is what Dr. Pat told you. He was suffering from frustration and anger after he had been laughed at and ridiculed by the store clerk. Now, what he did in this instance, Your Honors, is he took the drugs to suppress his symptoms. He took the time to think about what he was doing in the store. Then he took Mickey Jones's life, and following that, Your Honors, he took the money from the cash drawer. Your Honors, if it was all about Beastie, why'd he take the money? As to the issue of deterrence, all that needs be proven is that the defendant perceived the connection between his crime and subsequent punishment. Now, you heard testimony by Detective Press today that he did indeed perceive that connection, which was indicated by his reaction by giving a full confession to his crimes after the detective had indicated that death row may be a possible punishment for his actions. Now, further as to moral culpability, Your Honors, you have heard testimony from Dr. Pat, who explained to you that he went through a reasoning process in the store. He went through the process, the cost-benefit analysis addressed in Roper versus Simmons, to analyze and weigh options of how he could proceed. And then he decided that the best course of action in this instance would be to take someone else's life. Someone that had bullied him in the past, had bullied him in the present, and he didn't think should be bullying him in the future. So what he did was he killed two birds with one stone, Your Honor. He got the game, he got the money, and he got Mickey Jones out of his life. He took the drugs to suppress his symptoms. He took the time to think about what he was doing. He took Mickey Jones's life, and then he took the money from the register. As a result of all the evidence you've heard today, Your Honors, I would urge you to find against the defense's motion and deny an exemption for paranoid schizophrenics. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you, counsel. We'll hear from the defense at this point. You may proceed.
Today we have heard the case of Mr. Terry Bale, a man who has lost the ability to choose. Mr. Bale has lost the ability to think rationally, to use good judgment, and to control his impulses. Your Honors, today the evidence has proven two things. However, it has not proven anything regarding the surveillance video because it was not accepted into evidence. First, the evidence has proven that those afflicted with schizophrenia suffer from a debilitating condition giving them a reduced culpability for their actions. Dr. Pat and Dr. Goodwell have testified to these debilitating qualities. Schizophrenics, just like the mentally retarded described in Atkins versus Virginia, may know right from wrong, but their capacity for reasoning and judgment is still compromised as a result of the mental illness. Schizophrenics, just like the mentally retarded, have diminished control over their impulses because the voices and hallucinations cause them to do things. Just like those born with mental retardation or those who have yet to come of age, schizophrenics are not responsible for the hand dealt them. Mr. Bale does not choose to hear voices in his head. Like a child, his maturity will never come close to that of a normal adult. Just as the mentally retarded, Mr. Bale's disorder distorts his reasoning, judgment, and impulse control. He truly believed that if Beastie took human form, he had to kill it in order to save the world. Your Honors, this is maybe reasoning, but it most certainly is not logical. Mr. Bale's reasoning is and was impaired as a result of the mental illness. These conditions cause him to fall far outside the range of normal adults for whom the punishment of death is constitutionally permitted, rendering him less morally culpable for his actions. Second, the evidence has proven that all schizophrenics must be treated alike. Dr. Pat testified that schizophrenia can have a sudden or gradual effect. He also testified that during each stage of the schizophrenia, the symptoms vary with treatment and with how developed the disorder is. Each person experiences different symptoms at different times that vary in form and severity. The symptoms of the mentally retarded fluctuate in the same way, and because of this, because of the mere possibility of severe and unmanageable symptoms, Atkins versus Virginia held that all the mentally retarded are exempt from the death penalty. In Roper versus Simmons, a blanket effect was put over all juveniles because of their varying ages and maturities. Your Honors, the same should go for schizophrenics. A schizophrenic's behavior can change so suddenly that he could have a completely different conduct and appearance than that of a few days prior. It is impossible to know the severity of the symptoms of a schizophrenic at the time of a crime. So that all of these variances can be taken into account, we must consider all schizophrenics together. Dr. Pat and Dr. Goodwell are two qualified psychiatrists. Upon first evaluation, Dr. Pat diagnosed Mr. Bale with adjustment disorder, while Dr. Goodwell diagnosed Mr. Bale with schizophrenia. Your Honors, if these two experienced psychiatrists could disagree on the actual diagnosis of the disorder and still have conflicting views, how can we expect a jury of lay people to correctly decide a schizophrenic's fate? Despite the fact that there are no previous death penalty exclusions for schizophrenics, the Eighth Amendment should still apply. Death must be reserved to punish only the worst of the worst offenders who commit the most heinous crimes. These are crimes of choice, Your Honors, but schizophrenics cannot choose. The voices and hallucinations and delusions choose for them. Because of this debilitating condition, Mr. Bale cannot be included in this range of worst offenders. The fact that there is no national consensus is not an obstacle. Over time, the laws of a society change. As we gain a better understanding of issues such as schizophrenia, our laws too should change to reflect this understanding, Your Honors. The constitutional principles of Atkins and Simmons require a change in law for schizophrenics. Your Honors, the evidence should make this court set the precedent that the execution of schizophrenics is indeed cruel and unusual. Therefore, we respectfully ask that you choose to grant Mr. Bale's motion to exclude the death penalty as a possible punishment for Mr. Bale and all paranoid schizophrenics. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Is there rebuttal by the state?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honors, the first issue I would like to address is opposing counsel's arguments on the Atkins and Simmons decisions. Firstly, those decisions were justified primarily as Justice Stevens dictated in his majority opinion by a national legislative consensus, something that does not exist for paranoid schizophrenia. Similarly, they were based on a bright line that was very visible, that separated mentally retarded individuals and juveniles from the average population. By opposing counsel's own statements, this bright line doesn't exist. Dr. Pat explained to you that the onset of paranoid schizophrenia can be different for different people. It can be sudden or it can be gradual. They can suffer from any range of the symptoms, or they can suffer from very few of them. They can suffer severely, or they could suffer almost not at all, Your Honors. There is no bright line to establish, therefore, the level of suffering that separates them as a class from normal individuals. Dr. Pat himself indicated to you that paranoid schizophrenics who behave in a like manner to Mr. Bale have full moral culpability. Now, what opposing counsels also ignored, Your Honor, is the vast legal precedent set forth in the judiciary on this very issue. In 6 separate cases, the court decided that mental illness is not a viable categorical exemption from the death penalty. It was decided just 5 years ago here in State v. Scott. It was decided in Pennsylvania in Commonwealth v. Faulkner. It was decided in Illinois in People v. Scott. Now, opposing counsel would also like you to believe that the jury can't weigh these mitigating factors. However, in Commonwealth v. Faulkner, the court stated just that. It is within the province of the jury to weigh mental illness. And in light of the testimony and legal precedent you've heard today, I ask you again to deny defense's motion for exemption. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you. The matter will be marked heard and submitted. The court will take a recess, and then we'll advise you of our decision. All right, the court will excuse itself. I will remain behind in the event that there are any issues that counsel wish to take up with respect to improprieties and argument. Are there any on behalf of the state?
There are none on behalf of the state.
On behalf of the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right, those are waived, so we'll stand in recess. Thank you. Thank you very much. Court's back in session. You may be seated. Now, at this point, we have the opportunity to comment on your performances. Let me, as a presiding judge, first of all, congratulate all of the teachers and all of the parents who have spent so much time in encouraging what a great class of students to, first of all, engage in this kind of activity and then to rise to this level. Individually, I can tell you that I wish we had lawyers in the courts arguing cases as well and as knowledgeably as all of you have. And the performances that you gave were, in my judgment, just superb. I particularly thought that in the presentation by the state, there was a great command of where the testimony was going. I thought it was very clear what the positions were as articulated. The questions were appropriate and suited to the witnesses. On behalf of the defense, it may have been a little more difficult situation to get your hands around, but I thought that you mastered it so beautifully, and the witnesses. The role playing by the witnesses was not lost on me. I thought that you all really got into your characters, which is what you're supposed to do. And so my comments are that I would only encourage all of you, as you move through your careers, to think about law, to think about activity and argumentation and debate, where you can excel and develop these skills that you have, and understand that these are life skills. You're not just learning it for this competition, but you're really getting your hands into a field that will just benefit you no matter what career you choose in the rest of your lives. And so don't lose sight of where you are. Pursue what you're doing, whether it's in law or drama or whatever field you get into. The skills that you're learning here and developing will be lifelong learning skills, and you are all to be commended. We'll start again in order with Jane.
Thank you, Your Honor. First of all, I'm so proud of all of you. You just all did a marvelous job, and of course, as president of the State Bar Association, I can't help but hope that this experience will inspire all of you, witnesses and attorneys alike, to consider law as a career and to make your permanent home in Ohio so that what you become are Ohio attorneys. The witnesses were all just so well prepared and so credible, and I loved how well all the witnesses assumed the persona of the character that they portrayed. It was very believable, and you dressed the parts, you've done your hair consistent with the part, and that really enhanced the presentation of the case. All of the attorneys were just marvelous as well. Mr. Prakash, I was very impressed by your composure in the courtroom, and that you didn't speak too fast. And sometimes when you're nervous, it's very difficult to, keep yourself at a good pace, but that made it easy to understand and follow where you were going with your questions. And Mr. Bluebond, made very good eye contact with the judges. You made appropriate use of emotion in your argument, and you also had just excellent responses to the objections that were made. I'm very, very proud of you for that, very impressed. Mr. Harrison, you had the poise of someone already admitted to the practice of law, and I would have to say that your ability to work without notes is if you choose to become an attorney, hold on to that skill, because that's very unnerving to your opposing counsel, and I was very impressed by that. And finally, Ms. Del Santo, in your closing argument, you honed in extremely well on the issue of this very difficult problem, which was the question of mental illness. You made a very strong and a convincing argument, and you likewise organized your cross-examinations very well. And again, that was I found that to be very impressive. And congratulations to all of you, regardless of how we end up here today. All of you are just done just an excellent job, and I'm very proud that you're Ohio high school students, and thank you again for allowing me to participate.
Thanks. And I echo all the comments that have been said already, and really commend all of you and all of your teams. And I know there are opposing teams for some of the teams sitting here too, people who prepared the other side. And so congratulations to all of you. You just all did an outstanding job and showed such poise and command of the issues and command of the facts. On behalf of the case committee that created this case, I'll let you in on a little secret, which is just how terribly, terribly nervous we are when we release this case in the fall and we let it out to all of you, because as many hours as we put in trying to devise it and in trying to make sure that it will make for a good match and a good case for both sides to present, we just know how many hundreds and hundreds of hours all of you put into it, and just how totally devoted and steeped you become in it. And to us who are lawyers, it is scary because we know what's coming, and we know that you completely come to possess this case and really make it your own. And I would also, just echoing Jane's comments, really commend you both. I thought that both sides really stayed on theme, and it made for a very interesting and wonderful match to watch. The state really kept trying to focus on what was the mindset of Terry Bale at the time the crime was committed, really trying to show he's more like so-called normal adults than not, and therefore eligible for the death penalty. And the defense did an excellent job of being on point in exactly the opposite way, of saying, okay, well, in addition to looking at the facts of the particular crime, let's think about the big picture here. How did this person behave in college? How did this person behave afterwards in high school? This is kind of a sort of holistic thing that we need to look at. And I thought it made for a very dynamic matchup, and really congratulate you all.
Well, I echo everything that was said. With respect to the witnesses, I just would like to add that it wasn't just issues of hair, but the choices of tie, I thought, were spot on. That's a psychiatrist's tie. Probably what an off-duty police officer would wear. One thing that I noticed throughout the competition, and even at this level, is a tendency to become distracted from the issue of whether paranoid schizophrenics as a class ought to be exempt from the death penalty, to the particulars of this defendant. We decided in the deliberations, with only Justice Schemmer dissenting naturally, that it was the fault of the problem and not of any of the contestants. I was concerned, Mr. Harrison. I thought, oh boy, I can't believe this. He is not making his two strongest points in his closing argument. And then I discovered you've learned the ways of the prosecutor. You saved it for rebuttal. A typical prosecutor trick. You're right on career course there. And then I think, Megan, in a previous round that I judged, I pointed out to you that I found intriguing your turning the variability argument on its head, but I found it a little difficult to follow. This time I found it much easier to follow. So you've obviously polished that argument up, at least to the understanding of this poor mind.
Thank you, Your Honor. I echo all the sentiments that you've heard, all the good ones at least, and I was terribly impressed with your professionalism, your competence, and your obvious dedication. I just wish that there didn't have to be one winner, so to speak, because I think you really all deserve the prize. As the ACLU representative, I'm going to go back to the ACLU and tell them what this has got to be one of their more worthwhile projects that they sponsor. And hopefully, by casting their bread on the water, someday perhaps they'll have the talents of some of you working for them, or at least on issues that would be involved. I echo Justice Terry O'Connor's sentiments that hopefully someday you will become lawyers, or some of you will. I also wanted to echo my sympathies for you in this problem. I think the problem is terribly difficult, particularly at a trial level. I was trying to think, if I were going to prepare this case for trial, how do you do it? How are you going to show a national consensus? It's a kind of case that you can argue on appeal, and you can rely on articles and professional reports and that sort of thing. But at the trial level, to come up conceptually with the kind of evidence that you're going to have to introduce, I thought it was remarkable that you, A, were able to do it, and B, that you were able to stick with the point as it went along. So I would just echo those sentiments that you all did a great job.
I would echo the sentiments that have been made by the other judges, and just a couple additional points. The witnesses, your characterization was very good, and one of the things I noticed for all four witnesses is that you didn't over-exaggerate your portrayal of the character to the point where you became unbelievable. And there's a tendency, particularly with the officer and perhaps one or two of the other witnesses, to over-portray them to the point where you think, if that person were, in my courtroom, I really wouldn't find them to be terribly believable, because, they're just overkilling the portrayal. The attorneys, all four of you, I'd be proud to have you in my courtroom. You did an excellent job. You would expect, I guess, when you get to the championship round, that all four attorneys would be superb, and without a doubt, that's what you were. One of the things I noticed throughout the competition this year, the level of civility, the demeanor of attorneys is always, I think, has been better this year than in past years. And certainly in the championship round, the demeanor, the way that you responded to each other was excellent. Objections, having seen both teams before, I have the unique position where I have seen both teams. It's interesting to see that objections that are made before, you make the same objections, but you get a different response because you have a different opponent. And because you get a different response, you may not get the same ruling. And you adjusted very well to the fact that, you know, that's something that happens, and you went right ahead with your case and could barely skip a beat. The arguments were very impassioned, and you know, if there's a time for passion in the trial, it's when you're arguing the case and saying that this is my case and this is the way I feel strongly about it. And you both made very, very excellent arguments at the end. Both teams are certainly to be congratulated.
Thank you all very much. Now it's my pleasure to proceed, and we will award the outstanding witness and the outstanding advocate to those individuals. It's my pleasure to announce that the outstanding witness for this performance, as voted by all the judges, is Emily Vizzelli. And this was an extremely close vote. In fact, I think we voted this twice. But the outstanding advocate for this performance is Megan.
Especially Justice O'Donnell. They've taken time out of their very busy schedules to spend time with us here Saturday to judge this final round. So thank you to them as well for doing that for us. I'm now going to announce each team member's name. If you would
please come forward and collect your gavel from Justice O'Donnell for being with us today. From Archbishop Hoban High School, we have our advisor, Kevin Hillary. We have our legal advisor, Dan Cody. Our students, Erica Nunez, Amber Beery, Katie Sunday, Sarah Hanna, Andrew Bluebon, Megan Del Santo, Emily Bazzelli, Elise Balaj, and Daryl Hayes. From William Mason High School, we have our team advisors, Peg Elfers and Steve Prescott, our legal advisor, Derek Faulkner, and our students, Kevin Harrison, Cordis Prakash, Evan Leeson, Brent Burnett, John Raptis, Matt Wilkins, Matt Haynes, and Jeff Ellis.
I was hoping they were had enough. I didn't. Thank you very much.
I'd like to now call down all of our judges for the presentation of the final two awards.
Now, at this point, we have to render a decision. You heard one of my colleagues indicate we wish we didn't have to. What I can tell you is we weren't totally unanimous, so this becomes even more difficult. But the runner-up school for today's performance is Mason High School, and we're going to present the runner-up trophy to Mason. And now it is our collective honor to present the 2006 state mock trial winners to Akron Archbishop Hoban High School.